welcome to Pilates Elephants. I'm here with Heath Lander. Hey, Heath.
Hey, Raph, how are you?
I'm awesome because we are going to discuss how to really progress your clients. And I'm looking forward to that. I think it's going to be a very enjoyable convo. Plus,
We're talking reformer, yeah?
plus you've already had a second coffee. So,
Yeah.
all right. So this is one of the most common things that both of us get asked by instructors, or basically an instructors say to us where they feel they need help is like, how do I progress my clients in a reformer class? And I think there are several levels of, we're just talking off air, there are several levels of kind of like assumptions underpinning this that we need to kind of pare it back to, like, okay, what even is it to progress somebody before we tell you how to progress somebody. So firstly, what are we progressing somebody towards? Because progress means forward motion. And so forwards towards what? So what are we, like, what's Pilates for? We're straight away, we're 1 minute into the episode, we're already asking existential questions here.
Well, if we're on the what's it for thing, one thing that I find anchors me well is, because that's what's Pilates for me is, why am I showing up for the 15th year to do this thing for people? Yeah. So, and one thing that I come back to that works well is I'm trying to run classes that are appropriately challenging for everyone in the room so that they can live healthier, happier, longer lives, which I think is the spirit of what Joseph Pilates was doing as well. And so then if you work backwards from, I want my clients to be healthier, happier, and live longer, because I haven't yet met anyone in my studio who you say, would you like to be happier, healthier, and live longer? No one says, yeah, no, thanks, I'm good. And then the programming should support that. And then we go into what we can do physiologically to help those things happen.
All right. So we're progressing people towards happier, healthier, longer lives. I would agree with that. I think, we could probably, there's probably some nuanced interpretations of that, like, but I think let's just kind of agree on that for now, because I think broadly that's true for everybody. So, all right. And so what does it mean to progress someone? So, because to progress means to move towards a destination. Okay. So the destination is health, happiness, and longevity.
Yeah. So stronger, more flexible, more skillful is how I think about that.
Okay. And so if we think about the, happier, healthier, longer life, well, those are all what we'd call lagging indicators. So they happen after you do the thing. And so, if you want to be healthier, you don't just like be healthier. Like, it's not just a thing that you do, it's a result of other things that you do. So same with happiness, same with longevity. So, what are the things that you do to, which result in those things, in the context of Pilates?
Yeah. So the way I work with that is, what are the things that I can control in the studio? I can't control your nutrition, blah, blah, blah. But I can make you stronger. I can make you fitter, and I can make you as flexible as you need to be to do the things you want to do. And if that's Pilates, then that's going to, that dictates the movements that we work on, and more skillful. And, that's in the context of using the reformer. How much overlap there is between your skill on the reformer and your ability to do other physical skills,
Fairly minimal, I would say.
Yeah.
Given what we know about skill development.
That's it.
And that's not a reflection on reformer. It's just a reflection on just being good at playing basketball doesn't make you good at playing the flute. Skills are quite specific.
Quite specific, yeah.
And we know, I'd say there's basically what most scientists would agree is an incontrovertible amount of proof from large, well-conducted research studies that when it comes to health and lifespan, being stronger and more cardiovascularly fit are probably, aside from not smoking, probably the most impactful things you can do to improve both health and lifespan. And, being in, say, for example, being in the top quartile, the top 25% of fitness versus the bottom 25%, something like halves your chance of dying in any 10-year period of any cause. So this is a not insignificant, this is a very significant change in risk. When we talk about things like, even, nutrient deficiencies and things like that, we're talking about single digit percentage, changes in people's risk profiles. Whereas when you talk about fitness, it's orders of magnitude. So, this is pretty close to the most impactful thing that you can do to improve your lifespan and also your health span. So the amount of years that you have free of major chronic diseases like diabetes and heart disease and stroke and things like that, is to be as strong and fit, as possible. Now, there might be some upper limit to that where it's like, okay, if you're, working out 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, it's like probably you're not probably getting a lot more benefit, at that point. But for all mere mortals for whom the spectrum of how much they might exercise is between 0 and like a couple of hours a week, which is 99% of our clients, it's like the more the better.
Mm.
So, all right. So we're progressing our clients towards healthier, happier, longer lives, and the healthier and longer parts of those are really pretty closely related with how strong and how how fit you are from a cardiorespiratory standpoint. And I think the happier part, flexibility does come in there. I think it feels it's much more enjoyable to live in a body that can bend, comfortably, to do the activities that you want to do, and you don't feel like you need to moan and groan every time you get up out of a sofa or want to sit on the floor or whatever. So I think the flexibility thing comes into the happiness part. Flexibility doesn't really have any significant benefits in terms of life extension or health per se.
Mm.
What about the control aspect? So the attribute of coordination skill.
So what do you mean, what about?
Well, like, why is that important?
Well, we're talking about being a reformer Pilates instructor or teacher, and we're talking about this persistent question of how do I progress my clients? And the reformer is an inherently unstable thing, and so using it is a skill. And the way I see that is I can be the curator of that and just tell people what to do and control things through their spring tensions and the movements that I call. But I prefer to try to teach in a way that repeats things often enough that people recognize them. And so and then give them, information about the differences that they can experience. And so they start to be skillful with the apparatus and understand, the rise and fall of the spring tension affects this movement in this way. So, I mean, and like we said, skills don't transfer well, but a lot of people really love reformer. Like a lot of my clients, that's their exercise. And so making them better at using the reformer means that I can push further into bigger, heavier, and more complicated movements.
And also, I think there's a benefit, just inherent benefit to mastering something. Like it becomes inherently motivating to as you build skill and doing anything, it becomes more enjoyable because it's just like there's some kind of we're wired that way, and so that can come to the happiness bit, right? Like the satisfaction of just being really good at something. All right, so if we want to progress our clients, we're progressing them towards something because that's what progress means. And what we're progressing them towards is a happier, healthier, longer life. I guess most people teaching Pilates would not find that too controversial. And the leading indicators of a happier, healthier, longer life that we can control within a Pilates setting are how much strength, cardiovascular fitness, range of motion, and coordination or skill with the machine our clients develop. And I would say, all right, and so within that, like, are some of those things more important? Like we already said that, like, strength and cardiovascular fitness are more directly impactful. I mean, you can have all the skill and flexibility in the world, and it's not going to change your risk of getting cancer or dying of a heart attack. But if you can increase your hand grip strength, by 50%, you are going to have fewer heart attacks, strokes, and heart disease statistically. So, and yet, if somebody's highly motivated by flexibility and that's a big sort of driver of why they do it, well, the exercise that you don't do, doesn't actually, the perfect strength exercise that you don't do doesn't improve your your health and happiness. So how do we strike a balance between those, four, strength, cardiovascular fitness, flexibility, and control? And I mean, typically we talk about strength, range of motion, and control because cardiorespiratory fitness is something you can develop in Pilates, but I don't think Pilates is necessarily ideally suited to develop. So should we take that off the table and just talk about the other three?
Sure. I mean, I've spent a long time developing class structures and programs, or whatever you want to call them, that I think do a pretty good job of harnessing the reformer as a cardiovascular instrument. But when I check it against just running on my treadmill, it doesn't do anything to my heart rate compared to just running uphill.
Right.
So yeah, I think let's just focus on the big three.
Okay, strength, range of motion, control. How do we, how do you think about balancing those three things, challenges to those three things within a session?
How do I think about challenging those three things within a session?
No, how do you think about balancing the challenges between those? Do we spend 99% of our time on strength, and then 0.5% each on control and range of motion, or is it 1/3, 1/3, 1/3? What's the ideal in your mind?
All right. So the way I think about that is because my standing assumption is that most of my clients are not doing structured, systematic strength training away from the Pilates classes they do. And I know that to be true, just broadly, of the people I work with. So then I think the things that the things that would optimize strength outcomes, which would be a stable base of support and a predictable load and a movement that so that you can concentrate on the load, not how do I do this thing. I regularly repeat simple compound movements of the upper body and the lower body, aka push-ups and lunges, in basically every class. And I set that up so that it's not highly complicated and it's not asking for an additional range of motion challenge. So it's a lunge, it's a push-up, it's a pulling on the straps. So I teach that on very high rotation, and I encourage, by encourage, I mean direct people to use a spring tension that makes it harder and harder as they become progressively stronger. And I kind of tick that off in my checklist for the session, and then use their strength with other dimensions for other movements.
When you say a spring tension that makes it harder and harder, what do you mean?
Well, it depends on the movement. So
let's say lunges.
Say again?
Let's say lunges.
All right. So my go-to for lunges is to reduce the spring tension and focus more on the front leg, because, and I know some, but I've had conversations with people about that. But if we go up the spring tensions and you're lunging, by the time you hit 2 springs,
you can't push the carriage out.
You can't push the carriage. So you're losing range of motion. And we know that to make a muscle stronger, we want to go, through range of motion under load. So if my lunge is like that, I'm not really getting that range of motion. Well, I'm not getting that range of motion. Yeah. So the bed slides away, or you've got to put your hands on the foot bar. So it becomes a different skill.
Mm-hmm.
It's like my whole body trying to manage this spring tension. I'm not loading the leg.
Mm-hmm.
So I'd prefer to go ultimately 0 springs with the front leg on the biasing to the front leg. And that might eventually become, and I do this when the group's there, a pistol squat, which is single leg squat, standing on the extender with my shin against the foot bar. So I eventually take out the springs, and I wouldn't do that for 45 minutes, but I'd slot that in as part of my strength component.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So embedded in what you just said is the idea that we don't do an exercise on a static spring setting. So there's not like the quote correct spring setting for, lunges. Lunges aren't just like lunges, 1 red spring, check, all right. So I just want to park that for a second.
My glutes work, therefore they got stronger. I mean, that's sort of what I learned at Pilates school.
Yeah. I just want to bookmark that for a second, and I want to pin you down to a quick answer to the previous question, which is like, how do you weight or, divide up your, balance the workout between strength, range of motion, and control? So you said you've got these exercises on high rotation, push-ups, lunges, seated pulling straps on the reformer. So what roughly fraction of the class is just like those low complexity, high load movements? What percentage is, focused on range of motion, and what percentage is focused on, control? Or is control something you embed within the other things?
Yeah, I think so. I think of it as all 3 are in play all the time. But to your question, to try and answer it quickly and succinctly, is I would say I think of them as peaks. And each of those 3 things can peak. So you can be peaking for ROM, peaking for control, peaking for strength, but they're all in play. And I would look for at least 1 peak of upper body strength and 1 peak of lower body strength in the session. But that usually means 2 or 3 cycles through. So we'll do push-ups till everyone hates me, do something else in the same place, and then come back and do another round of push-ups. And usually I try and do at least 2 of them. And then we'll do the same thing on the leg. We'll try and do at least 2 passes on the legs where it's a strength thing that makes the thing need to stop, rather than I'm getting wobbly or...
Well, isn't that 2 peaks? What's the difference? Am I missing something?
2 peaks. Yeah. I aim for 2, don't always get it.
Okay. All right. And it's interesting. And I want to come back to this idea of control. And I know you do as well, but let's go deeper into, what you're talking about the spring setting, because I think that's something that is, that's something you and I were taught in the Stop Pilates universe, is that there is a correct spring setting for each exercise. And sometimes in the Stop Pilates world, it was a range, like, 1 to 2 springs or whatever. I know in other systems, they have a similar kind of mentality that, there is a correct spring setting for each exercise. And that just sort of seems, like, well, I can kind of see the sense of it in that, like, okay, if you get a room full of people are on a normal distribution for weight and height. And what that means is, most people cluster around, the average, and some people a little bit more, some people a little bit less. But, there's not many like 8-foot tall people in your Pilates class, and not many like 600-pound people in your Pilates class. Most of us are roughly the same height and weight. And therefore, if you're of, close to average height and close to average weight, when you do, and if you're a close to average, sedentary person strength, okay, when you do lunges on one red spring, that's probably kind of sort of about right for most people, right? So I can see the point of having some kind of starting point of like, okay, if you've got no idea, let's just start with one red spring.
Mm-hmm.
But then again, if you've got somebody who's significantly stronger or weaker, significantly heavier or lighter than the average, like just say you've got somebody, one red spring on your lunges, and you've got some like some 125-pound, slender woman there, versus you've got some like 220-pound guy there. It's like,
Linebacker.
yeah, are they going to experience the exercise at the same level of difficulty? Almost certainly not. So, so, and then of course, as both of those people get stronger, it will become easier and easier to do whatever spring setting you start them off on. And so you'll need to adjust. If you want them to continue to get stronger, you have to change the spring setting.
So if you want to get stronger, you've got to incrementally add more load to the same movement. I mean, that's what we didn't learn at STOT, right? And I think the construct is we do it on one particular spring setting. There's an alternative if you need to make it easier. Once you can do it on the correct spring, then the progression from there is to refine the quality of the movement.
And so just to be clear, that's not what you do. That's what you and I were taught back in the day.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that notion of there is an ideal spring setting, and like you should aspire to be able to do the exercise on that spring setting. And I'll give you an example. In long stretch, hands on the bar, feet on the, technically long stretch is supposed to be feet on the headrest. But it's like, everybody out in the world listening to this right now, stick your hand up if you do your hands on the shoulder block, your feet on the shoulder blocks. It's like, yeah, everybody's got their hand up right now. But you just say you're doing long stretch, and I think the setting that I most commonly get told on that is one spring, one red, like one full spring, one red spring. And I weigh 100 kilos, 220 pounds, and I'm 6 foot tall, which is tall-ish. And so when I push out, it's like, I just want my abs, my back wants to just snap in half by the time I'm like pushed 6 inches out from the foot bar. I find, one spring is really, really strong setting for me. And then sometimes I'm in class and they'll go, oh, yeah, go to a half spring if you're if you've been to class more than 10 times, go on a half spring or whatever. I'm like, no freaking way, dude. And that's not because I've got particularly weak abs. It's just because I'm really heavy, right? And there are people in class who are literally half my body weight. And so that spring is giving them literally double the support. So, yeah. And then the idea that, when I'm quote fit and strong, I'll be able to do it on one red spring. It's like, yeah, if I practice, I will be able to do it on one red spring. But that doesn't mean there's some deficiency that I can't do it on one red spring. The deficiency is like, well, if you chop both my legs off, it would be really easy to do it on one red spring. Yeah. So talk to me about, the radical concept that there is no kind of like one ideal spring setting for, each given exercise. And what should we do instead?
Well, the way I've come to think about that is that, I have little aphorisms in my head that help me remember things. I think of that as one movement, many springs. So, and there are movements on the reformer that lend themselves to this more readily than others. And in some sense, I think of them as better group exercises than others because of that one movement, different springs, different outcomes. So long stretch is one of them. If I do long stretch knees down on one spring, it's easy to understand the skill of the movement. I can get everyone doing it really reliably. I don't have to worry about the Raph in the room on the straight legs, so I've got to manage the spring tensions immediately. So I think, as you said, and the paradox for me there is that that's what we learned in Pilates school is one spring that everyone should be able to do, except that what we learned is that what we learned was versions that not everyone could do. But I think the better way is learn the version that everyone can do. And I think of that as like, I call that meat and potatoes. So what's the meat and potatoes of the thing that I can get everyone doing? Once I've done that, because now we've got the skill, I can start to manipulate the load via the spring tension because I've got the movement. And again, some movements are better for this than others, and long stretch is one. So if we reduce the spring tension...
Back rowing would be an example of one that's terrible for it.
Terrible for it, right? Because it's got very little up and down through the spectrum of spring tensions. It's like you can't do it on 2 and you can't really do it on half. It's sort of, you can, but you don't have enough tension to do the second phase. Whereas long stretch, half spring, armpits, abs, hip flexors. Coming up, going to 2.5 springs, 3 springs, 4 springs. It's like anterior shoulder, and if you're not careful, you'll snap in half. So it's sort of also your back hip and yeah. So you've got a sweet spot where you can learn the skill, and then you can change the springs to change the muscle group.
Right. And so just to briefly highlight what you said there, that there are a few exercises on the reformer where there's some kind of neutral spring tension where the spring tension roughly equates to the resistance from your body weight. And if you decrease the springs through there, it makes it harder in one particular way. And if you increase the springs, it makes it harder in sort of the opposite way generally. And so with long stretch on a very light spring, it's hard on your, pulling muscles essentially on the shoulder, like your pecs and your lats and your, muscles under your armpits, like you said, and also your abs. Whereas if you put on a heavier and heavier spring on long stretch, it becomes easier on the abs to the point where it's ridiculously easy, but it becomes really hard on your upper shoulders, your delts and your traps and things like that. Another example of that is side splits, very, very light spring, inner thighs, very heavy spring, outer thighs. And there are a few other ones that are like that, and scooter versus lunges. So, light spring, front leg, heavy spring, back leg. And so there are some exercises in Pilates where we can, in Reformer, where we can change which muscles are working in the exact same position by simply changing the spring resistance.
Yep. So if we do long stretch, knees down or up, I tend to call it knees down because it just suits more people, but the stronger clients have got the option. If we do a cycle of that on half spring, especially with a low foot bar, which reduces the spring tension even further, do that for reps till everyone looks fatigued, do something else, probably your legs, come back and add 1.5 springs, same movement, different muscle group. And so I can do 2 or 3 cycles of that, and I know I've hit your front and back shoulder to near fatigue, all in the space of 5 to 8 minutes. That gives me 30 minutes that I can do other stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So your clients don't have to, be shaking with strength challenge constantly. You just got to get those little peaks in, and those movements, one movement, many springs, the way I think about it, is a really handy way to do it, because it makes your progression in the class very efficient. You're not calling another movement. You're saying, come back on the bed, feet on the shoulder pads, knees down, hands on the footbar. We're going back to that long stretch, and that's literally as long as it takes to get everyone doing what we want. But now we're going to go to X spring. And
long stretch is another great one, or another thing that's great about long stretch is it's actually easy to adjust the springs in between reps, right? Because they're just right there. Whereas a lot of other exercises, like if you're doing side splits, it's not really functional to change the springs halfway. It's dangerous. And all those crazy things on the box and whatever, it's like Hold
on.
Okay, take the straps off your feet, turn around, put the fitness circle down, take the platform extender off, and change the spring. Now put the feet back in the straps, put the platform extender back on. Yeah, so whereas on long stretch, you can just reach down and change the springs pretty easy. Okay, and the health and longevity benefits and the strengthening benefits, which are the same benefits, like like we said at the start, measurable strength, regardless of how you measure that strength, whether you measure like hand grip strength or your 1 RM, like the maximum leg press you can do, or the maximum squat you can do, or the maximum bench press. Like, doesn't matter how you measure strength. The stronger you are, the longer you're likely to live, and the less chronic disease you're likely to have over that. So we're increasing health and lifespan literally by increasing strength. And so the health, life, and strengthening benefits, which turn out to be basically the same, thing, are increased by a surprisingly small amount of strengthening. And if you go from nothing to just like a couple of those peaks per week, like where you get to the point where you're like, holy crap, this is really hard, like twice a week and you just do like one set of long stretch, for example, on a light spring, where you're really working your abs and your, pecs and your lats sort of thing. And you get to the point where, the last couple of reps are like, oh, I'm not even sure if I'm going to be able to pull the carriage back this time. If you just do that like 2 times in a week, like 2 sets in one class, 1 time a week, like you will get appreciable increase in strength, and you will move out of that bottom quartile of, of strength range, and you will make a measurable change to your health and lifespan, statistically. And when we say measurable change to your health, what we'll be able to measure, like less systemic inflammation, probably things like reduced blood pressure, probably things like reduced visceral fat, all kinds of actual physiological biomarkers of health will change just by doing literally 2 sets, a set being defined as the last couple of reps are really damn hard per week, whether you do those in the same class or different classes, doesn't matter. Like, it's as little as 2 sets a week. And even if you are very experienced and have been training for a while, as little as 4 sets a week per muscle group will give you continued progress, as long as you continue to progress the exercise. So you don't have to do more and more and more and more and more over time to continue to get better. Like, you don't need a lot. All right. So when I can do, we're doing the long stretch on the one spring, right, with kneeling, and, it's my first class, and after 10 or 20 reps or 30 reps or whatever, I'm like, holy cow, this is getting really hard. Can I stop now? And you're like, okay, good job. And it's like, well, how do you know when it's time to change me down to a half spring?
I just go by quality of movement.
Mm-hmm.
So if but when I scan the room, somewhere around the 8 to 10 rep mark, if people are still moving really smoothly,
it's too easy.
Then I know next time I see them, I'm going to nudge them to take a harder option.
Mm.
Yeah. So, and I might get to 20 reps because sometimes it takes that long to kind of for everyone to get it or whatever. But at or around 8 to 10, my little, my little check on what I'm seeing is I want to see it starting to either they're reducing the range of motion to make it easier, or they're just starting to get a little shaky. Like, okay, great, that's about right.
Or they're sagging a little bit, or their hips are hinging a little bit,
changing their shape, finding And back in the day, that would have freaked me out because they were losing form. But now, with confidence and experience, I'm like, okay, well, you've done the first 6, no problem. I want you to be shaky. I actually want to see your form compromised, because there's still more in the tank when it's compromised. And that tells me we're getting to where I want to be.
All right. Well, let's unpack that, because, maybe, dear listener, that's not going to shock you if you've listened to all 280 episodes of this podcast up until this point. But for those of you coming to, late to the party, and just maybe this is your first or 10th episode, that seems like kind of a heretical statement in the Pilates universe of, like, we actually want people to, their form to break down. Isn't that like the opposite? Didn't you mean the opposite? Like, don't we want people's form never to break down, and encourage ideal form at all times? Why do we want their form to break down?
So we're talking about making people stronger. So if you can control the shape of the movement, no problem, then you've still got capacity against the load that you're managing. So I want to get you to the point where you're running out of capacity against the load that you're managing. And the indicator of that is that you shake, lose form, reduce your range of motion.
Right. Or put another way, dear listener, if you want to get stronger, you have to challenge your strength. And to challenge your strength, you have to lift something that is as heavy as you can lift, or pretty close to that. And when you lift something that is as heavy as you can lift or pretty close to it, it doesn't look that pretty. Like if you pick up a coffee cup, it's probably pretty easy for you to do that kind of smoothly and with great control. But if you pick up like a 100-kilo rock, it's very hard to look pretty doing that. And yet, one of those activities is going to make you stronger a lot more effectively than the other activity. So we actually do need to see people start to struggle with their form in order to know that we're going to help them get significantly stronger. Because if they can do the movement with so much control that it just looks perfect, it's highly unlikely that they're actually challenging their strength. Unless, like, asterisk, dear listener, for all those of you, banging on the desktop right now and going, no, but what about like elite Olympic weightlifters that lift with perfect form? It's like, all right, go practice 8 hours a day for 20 years. And then, yes, we'll say you can probably work very close to your maximum strength limits with perfect form. Great. But for 99.9999% of people, when you reach, when you approach your limits in terms of strength, which is what you need to do in order to get stronger, the closer you get to that limit, the less pretty it looks. But what about safety? I hear people yelling. I can hear it through the radio. Aren't we compromising safety when we're compromising form?
Well, this brings us back to so can I hurt myself by doing something that I'm not strong enough yet to do?
Actually, it's more, can I hurt myself by doing something in bad form?
Yeah. Well, if I'm understanding that, the answer is no. You can't hurt yourself doing it in bad form. You can only hurt yourself lifting something that's too heavy for you at the moment. Like if I can manage the weight, I can lift it any way I like.
Yeah.
Like if I go and try and lift 200 kilos in my deadlift, currently I don't have a 200 kilo deadlift. And if I give it everything I've got, form or otherwise, I could hurt myself.
I would say I would slightly disagree with that.
Okay.
I think load does predict injuries, but it's like if you just attempted to do one deadlift with 200 kilos and you can't lift, it's like what's going to happen is you're going to strain and it's not going to move, and you're going to be like, dang it, can't lift it off the ground. There's not going to be much chance of injury. Whereas if you lift something that is, just say you've got 160 kilo deadlift, that's your maximum, right? If you do like 159 kilos and you do that and you do it like you do it and you take a 2-minute break and you do it again and you do that like 30 times, that's when you've got a chance to injure yourself, when it's an accumulation of of stress on the system without the opportunity for the system to recover, in between. But if you just try and lift something, try it, dear listener. Go out to the corner of your house and try and lift the house up. I doubt you're going to injure yourself.
Yeah, because self-preservation would mean that we don't go as hard as we could.
Right.
And I guess that I'm thinking about it in terms of an extreme like that. So if I come back from a load that's heavy enough by volume or intensity, like effort, that could damage my tissues, if I come back and start everything at a load that I know you can manage, so if we bring it back to the long stretch, if I start your knees down one spring, if you're getting in and out of bed of a morning, I'm pretty confident you can do one spring, knees down, long stretch.
Right.
And then I progress the load, and I've seen you manage that load, and I can progress the load by reducing the foot bar, reducing the spring tension, or increasing the spring tension. Because I've seen you manage the load, then I know that you can tolerate that, and I want to see it compromise your shape.
Right. Because the alignment of your body has virtually no relationship to your chance of being injured in any given movement. Now, the alignment of your body, that's not 100% true in all situations. And, there are one or two situations where we do know that a particular alignment increases the likelihood of injury to a specific body part. Like, for example, when you run and change direction, if you have your hip more forwards over your knee and your knee more adducted and whatever, and there's a certain position, it's like that does place increased stress on the anterior cruciate ligament in the knee and makes it more likely that you'll injure that ligament, right? So,
And shoulder dislocation would be another one, right?
right. But in terms of just like, a really simple, relatively stable bilateral movement like long stretch on your knees, or even long stretch with the feet up, or even long stretch with one foot off the shoulder blocks, whether your hips are flexed or neutral, whether your back is extended or neutral, whether your shoulders are protracted or neutral, whether your knees are bent or straight, etc., have 0.0% influence on your risk of injury. And I'd say the thing that would be the highest predictor of your risk of injury in that situation, barring OH&S, like occupational health and safety, things like someone left a broken glass on the floor or something like that, or the reformers are too close together and someone trips over, or, barring like health and safety concerns like that, the highest risk of injury would be how hard you're pushing yourself and how frequently you do that within a week and without chance to recover. Like if someone's doing like someone's like third week of doing reformer ever, and they do like 15 sessions, and they're also on this massive weight loss diet and not eating properly, and they're like taking 27 coffees a day and not sleeping, it's like that person's very high risk of injury. But whether their hips are flexed or not has nil influence on that risk. It's all about the fatigue to recovery ratio, and so that, dear listener, and that's true in pretty much any athletic endeavor. Is what great S&C strength and conditioning coaches do is they have to manage the fatigue and recovery of their athletes. That's the main thing they do to. One of the two main things they do to reduce injuries. The other one is, guess what? Strengthening. So strengthening actually protects against injury. So long digression. Sorry to pull you away from that, Heath, but I think it's important because I think that was a heretical statement.
Yeah, well, I don't think you pulled us away from anything. Because in there, dear listener, is, and I see this on the Instagrams, like people post things of someone doing something in bad form, and there's a chorus of, oh, that's, oh God, I can't bear when I see that in class and something. I feel like that's like a paradigm shift that we have to push for, because the form of the thing is fundamentally aesthetic. So if we want to be in that long C shape, long flexion, as some people call it, and you make the 100 shape and you maintain that, it's like, awesome, great, but you're dancing within the capacity of the person. If they can hold that shape the way you want, then they have the capacity to think about their shape while they do the load, manage the load. And it's a big shift for us in the Pilates world to be able to say, the first thing I want you to be able to do is just do the movement, and that it's difficult for you to do at or around 10 to 15. And if I get that right, I don't actually care what you look like while you do it. Like, as long as the big bits are in roughly the right place, just if it's hard by 15, we're in the right place. Then we can think about the shape of it, if you want. It's just kind of got to reverse that. It's like, don't think shape first. Think, can they manage the load first? Then you can add the details of how it looks if you want.
All right. So this is another heretical statement or back to front statement, because not just in Pilates, in fitness as well, I see this a lot, is you've got to get your technique right before you progress the load.
Yeah.
And so this is, this is where back in Stop Pilates days, the first X number of lessons used to be just learning the 5 basic principles, and all you did was lay there and breathe and think about your pelvic alignment and your rib cage placement and all of that kind of stuff.
PTSD moment.
Yeah. But I see this in CrossFit even, where people's like, oh, you're not allowed to pick up a barbell until you can do the perfect movement with a broomstick first, And dear listener, it turns out that is not true on a couple of levels. And the first one is that, like we said about skill being specific, so learning to play basketball doesn't make you better at playing the flute. Well, it turns out that playing basketball doesn't make you better at playing basketball with a brick instead of a ball, because skill is specific even within a domain. Like, there are subdomains. So what I mean, an example of that is like, well, learning how to lift a broomstick correctly is not the same skill as learning how to lift a barbell with 100 kilos on it correctly. It's like a brick compared to a feather. And so it's just not the same. Juggling with 3 feathers is not the same as juggling with a chainsaw, a live cat, and a raw egg. It's a different skill. And so to get good at lifting a barbell, guess what you have to practice? Lifting a barbell. and to get good at long stretch on a heavy load. By heavy load, I don't necessarily mean a heavy spring. I just mean it's challenging you from a strength standpoint. To get good at long stretch on a heavy spring, you have to practice on a heavy load. You have to practice long stretch on a heavy load. And so it's like doing it on easy mode isn't going to make you better at doing it on hard mode, which is paradoxical. And all of the health benefits accrue from doing it on hard mode, and none of them accrue from doing it on easy mode. So those 3 lessons that you spend teaching your clients the 5 basic principles is like they're getting 0.0 health benefits in those lessons. All you're doing is boring them out of their brains.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's something there too. Just to click on that. I mean, in terms of the like the real world of that. So teaching long stretch to a group, that one spring that everyone can do that doesn't have the outcome for the strength output is still where I would start the movement, because I want to make sure that people understand the basic skill of the thing. Like, I want that you're not, when the classic thing with teaching long stretch is that people do knee stretch. And when you're teaching knee stretches, people do long stretch. So it's like, if we're doing long stretch, you want to roughly have your Adidas lines straight.
By that, you mean when you say, okay, everybody, we're going to do long stretch, so push in and out with your arms, they actually hold their arms still and push in and out with their legs. And paradoxically, when you say, hey, everyone, we're going to, okay, let's do knee stretches then. So I want you to keep your arms still and move in and out with your legs. Then all of a sudden they think it's time to bend their elbows.
Yeah. So at the beginning of it, you want to kind of understand if long stretch means straight arms, straight body, bed moves out, bed moves in. But that's the level of understanding.
Right. So it's not just like, hey, everyone, there's a reformer, put on this number of springs, go do long stretch, figure it out. You need to help them understand the movement to the level where they're actually doing something that like does in fact resemble long stretch. as in it's not knee stretches, it's long stretch. Okay. But it doesn't have to be a pretty long stretch. It could just be like, okay, yeah, I can see that that's long stretch,
Yeah.
That's good enough.
Yeah.
To get the benefit.
Yeah.
And once you get them there, quote, improving their technique doesn't give any health benefit. Now, that's not to say you shouldn't improve their technique, because, like we said at the start, mastery is inherently motivating, and feeling yourself getting smoother and better and more accomplished at a thing, feels good, makes you happy, makes you want to do more of that thing. So I think that's a good thing to help people achieve, but I think it's really valuable to bear in mind that it's kind of like that's the sizzle, not the sausage. That's not the actual health benefit.
Can I jump in and put something in? And I'd love to hear what you think, your thoughts on this. So here's an argument for teaching form. When I teach long stretch in any way, I tend to say, when I teach long stretch, I almost always put some push-ups in, because especially if I'm using the light spring, as I said before, I can do pulling muscles and pushing muscles by going straight arms out, straight arms in, push up, down, push up, up. I really like that little couple. But that's not what I'm raising. When I do the push-up, one of the things that I always call is hands shoulder width, elbows in tight. Now, I don't say if you can't keep your elbows in, don't do it. I just say that. That's what I call. And if people go flared elbows, I don't care. Like, it's fine. So I'm not saying that there's the right way to do it. But the reason I call elbows in, and as people get stronger and can take more, can manage more skill within the load, I ask them to have their elbows in, and I also ask them to try and keep the bed on the stopper and let their body move forward of the footbar. Again, most of the class aren't doing that, and I don't care. But the people who are at that higher level of strength and control, I'm nudging them to that, because at some point when most of the class can do that, I might go and do grasshopper on a light spring. Mm-hmm. And when I do grasshopper on a really light spring and all my weight goes into my hands, if my elbows flare, people tend to fall off. So having the elbow above the wrist makes me biomechanically more efficient if I'm trying to manage all my body weight in my hands like grasshopper. So, I teach a grasshopper where you bring your hips off the box if you can. I've never called that for the general public, but I do it on the reformer, and I teach it in my advanced class online. And that's all because there's a gymnastic progression, which is basically grasshopper with no box. You're just hovering off the floor. And if you do that with your elbows wide, you have to be a total freak, like a total freak. But if you have your elbows over your wrists, you're much more biomechanically.
Block your arms up against your hip bones and that kind of.
Well, and that's an easier way, again, is actually have your elbows on your hips. Yeah. But if you take your elbows off your hips, you really want your elbows above your wrists. I've never taught that to anyone on the mat. I've got some people I've taught it who can hover off the box. Again, they're instructors that I teach online, not the general public. But if we come back down that line, when I call push-ups, I call it with elbows in, because in my head, we're on a progression that goes towards that grasshopper. And like I said, if people don't, I don't go over and go, no, your form's no good, you can't do this. It's just like, that's my thinking. I guess I just wanted to share that and hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. I mean, it's kind of like in the invisible, vestigial hand bones inside a whale's flipper. That it's like nobody knows it's there, but it's building. Like when you're doing the push-ups and Heath's always yelling at you, elbows in, elbows in. You're like, why the heck? What does it matter? And then you do grasshopper. You're like, now I get it.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah.
All right. So we have this idea we have this process now of starting people with a simple compound movement that works, some kind of push exercise for the upper body, some kind of pull exercise for the upper body, some kind of leg exercise. And of course, if you're doing a good compound movement, your abs are in there as well, like for example, long stretch, but you can always add more abs, nothing wrong with that. But the point is, choose a simple movement that it's not, their main challenge is not going to be just doing the movement from a skill perspective, but it's actually going to be like the brute force to actually push the carriage out or pull the carriage in, one of those two. And then do that choose a spring setting where everybody in the room can do it for maybe 20, 30 reps, just so that everybody can get a chance to actually get the hang of the basic position. Like your body should be in a relatively straight line from head to knees, and your arms should be straight, and your shoulder joint should be where most of the movement's happening. And so once everybody's basically doing that, then you can look around and go, okay, is there anybody for whom this is kind of a struggle? It's like, okay, you keep doing that. And anybody it's not kind of a struggle, and you can tell that because they're moving super smoothly, is like, okay, great, let's make this harder. And in a long stretch, you make it harder by taking springs off. And then you take enough springs off so that they can only do roughly 10 reps before they're going like, ooh, and then you chuck on, you do some kind of leg exercise or something, and then come back and do it again.
Yeah.
And if you literally just do that twice in a week, whether it's twice in the same session or over 2 sessions, doesn't matter, beginners will get stronger, significantly stronger. And if you do it 4 times in a week, so do it twice in a session, do 2 sessions a week, even advanced people who've been training for years will continue to progress their strength, which is the same thing as saying get healthier and statistically increase their chance of living longer, as long as you progress the load, which is a big asterisk. Because I think, that's the reason we're having this conversation, is because a lot of times the load doesn't get progressed. And it's like, I've been doing footwork on the same 2 springs since 1997.
Yeah. And the other thing that I think prompted this is there's the doing the same exercise, doing the same movements on the same spring tension because it's got a correct spring. And then the other thing, we're talking about progressing. We're talking about making it harder, and we're talking about load as the thing that we're making harder. And the other, and what we see a lot of, and when we teach people, we see that if they've learned something somewhere else or they've watched the Instagrams, what they bring to that is, when I make things harder, I'm going to make it more complicated. So
Right.
I'm not going to change the load input. I'm going to make you juggle stuff while you do the thing.
Yeah. And so the example that you used when we talked about this before we started recording today was, sometimes you've had conversations with people where you say, hey, do you know what layers are? And they go, yeah, I know what layers are. That's where you make things incrementally harder. You do it, then you do a harder version, you do a harder version. And that is true. That's correct. But I think people misunderstand, like within that, like what does it actually mean to make it harder? Because the examples that you often get, and I see these as well, they'll go, okay, I'll do a lunge, then I'll go a bit deeper into the lunge, then I'll go deeper into the lunge and lift the heel, then we'll go deeper into the lunge, lift the heel and hold a fitness circle, and then we'll juggle the fitness circle, and then we'll do that on a Bosu, and then we're just adding more complication, more coordination, more balance, more gizmos, but not actually adding more load. There's not more load on the glutes. There's not more load on the quads just by lifting your heel. Unless lifting your heel is just a plot device to keep them in the bottom position of the lunge for longer, in which case, yeah, just being in that position for longer is increasing the load. But by itself, just having your heel off the floor and then doing the same movement does fuck all to progress the movement. It makes it harder to balance.
Makes it harder to balance. Yeah. And if you want to get good at when this is the thing about the reformer, right? If you want to get good at balancing, then that's a pretty cool place to do it. Like it's a cool thing for that, like teaser on the long box is a really cool thing because it's like I can do 30 teasers off the mat, but it's a very different skill on the reformer because of all the different things that are happening. And that's cool. That's fun. Like it's great. It's not bad. I'm not saying that's bad, but it's making things more complicated doesn't improve the strength of the person doing it. You just have to know what the progression that you're working on is.
Right. And it comes back to thinking like, okay, what's this exercise for? Why are we doing this exercise? And if the answer to that involves helping the person to get stronger, then increasing the complexity is probably working against that, and it's probably going to make it more difficult.
Yeah. And I think I've had conversations with instructors where they feel like, okay, so now I'm really focusing on strength. Like I feel like I've got it. I'm increasing the load in a movement, blah, blah, blah. Now I feel like I've kind of lost lots of what I used to love about the reformer. And so to that you just said, I feel like you can have your cake and eat it too. You can make your clients really strong, and then you can use that strength to do really cool shit on the reformer. So you've got to have strength to do teaser. You've got to have strength to do horseback. In fact, you've got to have enough strength that you can pat your head and rub your tummy while you use that strength, because you've got to manage perturbation. You've got to manage, stability challenge. So it's not one or the other. It's do stuff that is explicitly focused on getting stronger, then go and use that strength to do really cool shit on this thing that is really unstable.
Right. And also, like, there's nothing stopping you from doing long stretch on zero springs and then doing mermaids, like those things are not mutually exclusive. So you can do things just for the fun of it, just for gentle, stretchy, feels good, whatever. You can, or you could do long stretch on zero springs and then do, Bosu teasers with the fitness circle and two toning balls and a booty band and, whatever. Like it doesn't have to be either or, but I think it doesn't have to be either or in any workout. But I think in any single exercise, there is a degree to which it's either or, because if you've got too many booty bands and Bosus and fitness circles and all the rest of it, it's like you actually can't produce as much force. And so you can't load up the muscles as much. And so it does decrease the effectiveness of your strengthening exercise. I mean, if you look at athletes who actually train for strength, like they're not using booty bands, Bosus, fitness circles. They're just lifting really fucking heavy shit, on stable surfaces. And so if you want to get strong, just do what really strong people do and lift really heavy shit on stable surfaces. And we can do that on a reformer up to a point. Yeah, not up to elite strength athlete levels, but we can, for general population, it's absolutely amazing. But just, I think, understanding that if your goal is to get someone stronger, you need to give them a really simple movement where the limiting factor is going to be their strength, not coordination or range of motion.
Yeah. So the way if we would just click on the things that we've been talking about it through the conversation and in the last couple of minutes, if I've heard you correctly, the way we could illustrate that is teaser's not a great place to develop ab strength.
Teaser on the reformer.
Teaser on the reformer, where you lie on the long box, hands in the straps, press into the straps and come up to the teaser shape. Not a great place to develop ab strength because of the instability that you're having to manage, which costs you force production. If you wanted to develop the ab strength, do hands in straps on really heavy springs, do long stretch on really light springs, do elephant on really light springs, anything.
Do teaser on the mat or do teaser on the box on the reformer without the straps.
Yeah. And with some dumbbells in your hands and hold them overhead, or, wherever the load is much more predictable than this freaking thing where the straps are pulling you backwards. And
or lie on the floor and have Joseph Pilates stand on your abs and do the hundreds.
There's that option. Yeah. So yeah, I think that for me that was what came to mind. It's like teaser does require ab strength, but you're also juggling. So you should go and get enough strength to be able to juggle.
Right. It requires a lot of ab strength and a lot of control. And so it's an expression of strength and control. It's not how you build strength and control.
Yeah, well said.
Like once you've got enough strength and control to do the basic movement, well then, yeah, you can develop it further by doing the movement. But when you can't do the movement yet, like you're not going to develop the strength by doing the movement because you can't do the movement.
And to catch that, because you said you get better at lifting a barbell by lifting a barbell, you won't get better at doing teaser by doing teaser if you can't do teaser.
Right. Well,
if you can't get it, if you can't get the basics of it because you haven't got the requisite strength to get yourself up, then the straps aren't going to make that easier because it's a skill thing as well.
Well, I'll give you a barbell example, and it's probably be less relevant to anybody listening to this, but just because you said the best way to lift a barbell is to lift a barbell. Well, for something like an overhead squat where you have your hands wide on the barbell and you lift the barbell right overhead and then you squat down, I can't do that movement because I don't have enough shoulder mobility. So as I squat down, my arms come forwards. And of course, when you've got 100 kilos overhead or whatever, it's like you can't have your arms forwards. It just falls down. So I don't have the range of motion to practice the barbell movement. So it's like, well, there's no point. It's like if I did like 10,000 reps of overhead squats, it's like I wouldn't get any better at it because I actually can't get into the position in the first place. So I have to, if it was a goal for me to do overhead squats, I would have to do some stretching of my shoulders first and develop that basic mobility. And I would do that stretching in a position that was extremely stable and required no skill. And the only limiting factor on that movement is my shoulder range of motion, not skill or strength. And once I had that range of motion, then as soon as I was able to, I would do the barbell overhead squat, and then I would improve my overhead squat by overhead squatting.
Yeah.
All right. So we can progress exercises, progress strength by doing simple compound movements that involve either a push in the upper body, a pull in the upper body, or some kind of lower body push, like a lunge or a scooter. We could do footwork, of course. Why didn't you mention footwork in there?
Why didn't we mention footwork?
Yeah.
For strength.
Yeah.
Well, footwork, I love footwork. I teach it really regularly. I have 2 warm-ups that I teach in every single class. It's either supine or quadruped, and footwork is the first thing I do in the supine one. And when I call that, I say, choose heavy springs, folks. And by heavy, I mean all springs or slightly less. And what I've found, we have a lot of class pass clients, so I have a lot of itinerant clients in my sessions. And I've found that if I say, do footwork, a lot of people go 2 springs. And then I have to go and sort of explain, you could probably go a bit heavier. And so I just have come to saying all springs or slightly less. And you see people raise their eyebrows and they give it a try. And a lot of people are often surprised that they could do 3 or 4 cycles of footwork on full springs that they'd never tried before. And it's like, great. Apart from going to single leg, we just ran out of load. And It doesn't actually take that long to run out of load in footwork.
Right, because legs are freaking strong as. Even people that are relatively weak, legs are the strongest part of the body. And so you basically run out of springs almost immediately, and you can't progress the load. Even for most people, day one, the springs, there's not enough springs on the reformer to strengthen their legs with doing less than 100 reps of footwork.
Yeah.
So footwork's great, but it's not a great leg strengthening exercise unless somebody's like seriously
coming from a low base,
coming from post-surgery or,
But when we talk, one of the things that I've talked a lot about in in the diploma and the clinical program is the reformer as a lower extremity rehab tool is awesome because it lets you do full range of motion at less than body weight. And that's actually quite hard to do without equipment.
Mm.
Well, it's really hard to do without equipment. So that's really cool. But as a lower extremity strengthening tool, especially via footwork, the reformer's
Kind of
got its
sucks.
limitations.
Yeah. But for most people, when you add in lunges and splits, you can make it pretty hard for almost everyone. Because when you add deep range of motion, which you can get into
Plus gravity,
plus
body weight.
You can get into a lot of challenge there. And it's like, it's possible for people to get to a point where you can't challenge them much more, but it's like, that's a pretty, you can get people pretty dang strong with those movements on a reformer. Yeah, but not with footwork. Sorry, folks. All right. So happiness, health and longevity, strength, range of motion and control kind of mean the same thing. That's what we can do with Pilates to influence those outcomes. The control part really comes more into the firstly, just having a basic control, so you actually are doing the movement that you think you're doing. Like, for example, if you're doing long stretch and your hips are hinged way back, it's like you're probably not getting the full benefit of the exercise because you're just shortening the lever there too much by hinging your hips. So there is some level of control that actually facilitates the strength outcomes, but the control in and of itself doesn't give you more longevity. But it is important in there for the strength outcomes and also for just the sense of mastery and intrinsic motivation. And to progress strength, you need to find a movement that's simple enough and has enough load where load is the limiting factor or strength is the limiting factor on how many they can do. And they need to get to a point where it starts to look a little bit ugly by roughly the 10th rep, 10, 12, 15, it's all good, but somewhere around there. And even up to 30, it's not the end of the world if they get to 30, they'll still get like the vast majority of the benefits there in terms of strengthening. But dear listener, if you've ever done 30 reps to failure, where like the last rep was like, holy cow, that's virtually impossible, that burns like a bastard. It really burns. Whereas if you do 10 reps to failure, it doesn't really burn much at all. So it's a lot less painful when you do heavier loads. And your clients
shaky.
Yeah, it just gets shaky. And plus it just takes less time, right? It takes three times as long to do 30 reps as 10 reps and you get the same strengthening benefit, by approaching that point of failure. And just do that a couple of times in a session for each major, push upper body, pull upper body, and some kind of lower body push. And if you want to throw in an extra set of abs, no one's going to complain. But, if you're doing a long stretch on a very light spring, you're working the abs plenty already. And then you can do all the mermaids in the world after that and Bob's your uncle. Anything else you'd like to add, Heath?
No, I think we've sucked the juice out of that one for the day.
All right. Good talk.
You too. Thanks, Raph.